Henry Cejudo is fighting this weekend in what I consider to be a make or break fight. So I wanted to run through all the other big name fighters who I think are entering make or break spots in their careers heading into their next matchups. So I am going to start off here with the Henry Cejudo Song Yadong fight. And I feel like Henry probably holds the title for the worst MMA retirement of all time. He was a double champ, had just defended the second belt up at 135, and decided to retire on top. Now, I'm totally cool with guys retiring on top, going out with the belt, a guy like Khabib, GSP, I think it's very admirable. You're going out on a win. We don't have to see these guys, these legends, kind of go on a losing streak to end their career. Totally cool with retiring with the belt. But if you are going to go out on top, you should probably stay retired and make sure, you are settled, like you are done with the sport. Because in this case, you come back 3 years later, you're not going to say a shell of your former self, but he clearly was not the same guy as when he retired as a double champion. And then you also lose a lot of your leverage, right? He was the champion, getting pay-per-view points. He was going to be the A side of a lot of matchups. Now you're coming in, no longer the champion. It's just not a great spot to be in. So he's come back after 3 years. He has suffered back-to-back losses. Now, elite competition. Lost a very, very close title fight to Aljamain Sterling, and then lost to the future champ Merab in a fight where he won the first round pretty clearly, and then, Merab, as he does, kind of built up his pace and won the second and the third. So back-to-back losses, but against really, really high-level competition. Now he is getting a step down in competition against number 8 Song Yadong, but Song Yadong is still very, very good. I think bantamweight is a top 2 weight class. He's a top 10 contender. He's well-rounded, hits really, really hard, like truly does have the ability to hurt Henry Cejudo and put him out. And I do think this is make or break because with a win, I think he's probably one more W away from getting a title shot. He's still one of the bigger names in this weight class. So if he beats Song Yadong, gets a top 5 win, he's probably walking back into another title shot, especially if there's a different champion, like maybe the Merab fight is kind of a tough sell, but he's right in the title mix if he does pick up a win here. With a loss, you're probably looking at him walking away from the sport. He's 37 at bantamweight, which typically doesn't go well. 3 losses in a row, unless he's just fighting for a check, which Henry Cejudo doesn't seem like that type of guy. He seems like he's a competitor. It's a belt or nothing for him. Maybe, some of his recent fights, taking this one against Song Yadong kind of goes against that. But I think if he suffers 3 losses in a row, he will probably walk away. So with a win, potential title shot after his next fight. With a loss, potentially never see him fighting again in MMA. Definition of a make or break matchup. Now this next fight, some people might disagree, but I think Justin Gaethje is entering a make or break matchup against Dan Hooker. And it's not necessarily like if he loses this fight, I think he's terrible. He will have completely fallen off. Like Dan Hooker is a really, really tough matchup. But I think the difference between a win and a loss here is probably a title shot and then him walking away from the sport. So I think if he goes out and finishes Dan Hooker, has a fun performance, he's probably setting himself up to be the number 1 contender. We've seen some weird stuff at lightweight with guys, having to pull out of title shots. Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan. It seems like Islam Makhachev is interested in fighting Justin Gaethje, a fresh matchup. He's already beaten Charles Oliveira. He has beaten Arman Tsarukyan. And, he's a fun fighter. The UFC is going to want to throw him in some title fights. So I think if he goes out there, KOs Dan Hooker, he could definitely be fighting for the belt next. With a loss, I could definitely see him walking away from the sport. He had already talked about having like 1 run left in him at the title, and that was actually before the Max Holloway loss. So when he was fighting Rafael Fiziev, the vibes around that fight were like if he loses, he's kind of out of the title picture. He's probably going to pack it in, no longer going to be competing. He'll walk away. He ends up winning that Fiziev fight. Then he, loses to Max Holloway, obviously a vicious knockout. And he's talked about how if he goes to sleep again, he will retire. And I'm just looking at this fight, and if he's losing to Dan Hooker, he's probably getting put out, or he is losing like a war where he takes a lot of damage. Like Justin Gaethje does not lose fights in a way that he's just not, taking an insane amount of punishment, getting hurt, getting clipped, getting finished, or just losing like a grueling decision. Like when Justin Gaethje is in fights, they're going to be dog fights, win or lose. So if he loses this matchup, you have to imagine he's out of the title picture for, at least a couple more fights where he'd have to string together a win streak. And at that point, with the damage he's taken, the retirement talk he's kind of already put out there, I do think he would walk away. So we are potentially looking at title shot or retirement based on the result of this fight. Then we're going to be moving up one weight class into welterweight, where we have Gilbert Burns taking on Michael Morales. And this kind of seems like just the sad career end trajectory that a lot of these veterans kind of go on. Gilbert Burns has lost 3 fights in a row: Bilal Muhammad, Jack Della Maddalena, and then Sean Brady. Those are not bad losses. Those are, 3 really high-profile guys in this welterweight division. Bilal Muhammad now the champion. JDM potentially a Leon Edwards win away from getting a title shot. I think Sean Brady's in the mix. Doesn't have the same big name, but probably a top 5 welterweight at this point, in terms of his ability. So right now, Gilbert Burns is ranked number 8. He is fighting number 12, Michael Morales. But this is not a nice step back, a dude who's kind of a career outside the top 10, journeyman type dude. Michael Morales is going to climb these rankings, and he definitely has a shot to be the champion at some point. He is 17-0, a dangerous prospect, has a big frame for the weight class, 6 feet tall, 79-inch reach, which is wild for someone who's that height. He has KO power, great at defending takedowns, 92% takedown defense. And so if Gilbert Burns loses this fight, which unfortunately I do think is pretty likely, there would be 4 straight losses. He would probably have to be fighting outside the rankings. You would think retirement would be, a legit consideration here. Or he's, fighting back in the rankings, just kind of collecting checks. On the other hand, if he finds a way to turn back Michael Morales, he has fun fights, somewhat of a big name in the weight class, has some decent performances against a guy like Khamzat Chimaev, had a fun fight with Kamaru Usman. If he picks up a win here, he's probably fighting someone in the top 5 and could potentially climb back into title contention. But at 38 years old, I think with a loss here, his time at the top is probably done. Now, these next few fighters I'm going to talk about aren't booked yet, but I think whoever their next matchup is against, they are make or break fights for them. So we're going to start off with Kamaru Usman. He is already on a 3-fight losing streak. Now, the quality of competition, very, very high. We have the 2 Leon fights. Obviously, the first one, he was on his way to winning before he got knocked out. The second one, lost a competitive fight. And then the short notice fight against Khamzat Chimaev. The issue here for Kamaru Usman is that he's just not getting any younger at this point. He's 37 years old. He turns 38 in May. And his last fight was in October of 2023. So if you're getting up there in age and you're dealing with injuries, you're not super active, that's not a great sign. When we're looking at his potential next fights, I think some of the more likely names are guys like Sean Brady, Joaquin Buckley, Ian Gary. Just looking at who's booked right now, I think most of those guys are Joaquin Buckley, Ian Gary, kind of bigger names. Sean Brady, that would be more of the higher profile, higher ranked guy. I think with a W, just based on his resume, what he's done in the weight class, he's right back in the title picture. He picks up one big win. I mean, he might be walking into a title fight. On the other hand, with a loss, that would go from 19 straight wins to 4 straight losses. Kamaru Usman does not strike me as someone who wants to be a gatekeeper, someone who wants to be sitting around in the number 6 to 15 rank area. He seems pretty title or bust. With one more loss, he's probably out of the title picture for the rest of his career, and I think he would definitely consider retirement. Next up, we have Michael Chandler, and he, maybe quietly, not quietly, has lost 4 of his last 5. Now, the competition has been very, very high. 2 Charles Oliveira losses, and then losses to Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. His only W, though, was Tony Ferguson, which at this point, a very, very low quality win, especially considering the fact that he got dropped in the first round there. And for Chandler, it's pretty much been over 4 years since he has picked up a quality win, and that was the Dan Hooker knockout in his UFC debut. He is 38 years old, has an April birthday, so approaching 39, and I just thought he looked really flat in the second Oliveira fight. Now, he did, show some power, show some fight in the 5th round, was somewhat close to a finish there, but getting up there in age, was coming off a 2-year layoff. What was kind of, I guess, most disappointing to me was the takedown defense. Charles Oliveira isn't someone who's known for having great takedowns, great wrestling. Obviously, his jiu-jitsu, his offensive jiu-jitsu is top tier, but I mean, he was pretty much taking Michael Chandler down at will, which was not a great sign for someone who I thought, with his wrestling pedigree, would be better in that area. He's also someone, just in terms of his style, he relies on explosiveness, his raw athleticism. That's definitely something that's going to fade as he gets older and older, which we might have already, started to see in that Oliveira fight. And now we're looking at his next potential matchup here. I know there's been some rumors thrown around about an Arman Tsarukyan fight. That would just seem like very odd matchmaking considering the complete lack of success in his recent fights for Chandler. And then the fact that Arman Tsarukyan has already like earned a title shot at this point, like if he's going to the back of the line, a Chandler fight still does not make sense. So I'm assuming he's going to fight down in the rankings. I do think a Paddy Pimblett matchup would make some sense. A loss to Paddy would just completely end, any hope of getting back to the title. A win, however, even though Paddy's not some sort of super highly ranked guy, a win could throw him right back to the wolves in terms of the top guys at 155. And he does just have like the big knockout upside of like he could go out, knock out a top guy, and end up finding his way back into a title shot. I'm not saying it's likely, but a loss, you're really kind of contemplating where he fits in this weight class if he wants to continue. Another guy just like Gaethje who's taken a lot of damage. With a win, you could see a path where he's another win away from getting, into a title shot again. So another guy who I think is entering a make or break spot. And then the final guy I'll talk about here is Paulo Costa. And his kind of career fall off is just really sad. He went from an undefeated fighter who just looked like the Terminator in his fights. This dude started off his MMA record at 13-0, 5-0 in the UFC with 4 knockouts. I mean, this was the guy who was like walking down Yoel Romero. No one walks down Yoel Romero, and that's what Paulo Costa was doing, to now losing 4 of his last 5 and having his entire style just shake up. Like, he seems to be gun shy at this point. He's not the same dude who would just walk guys down, always gunning for the finish. Now, he's not losing to bad fighters. Like, those losses are to Izzy, Vettori, Whitaker, Strickland. I mean, 3 of those dudes are champions. The Vettori loss, not great, but, it is what it is. The other 3 guys, very, very high level. He's currently ranked number 11. You have to assume his next fight is going to be, someone in like the number 10 to 15 range. And if he loses that fight, I could see him potentially being done in the UFC. He's someone who hasn't necessarily been the easiest guy to work with, even though I don't necessarily agree with the UFC's, agenda of trying to say that he was dodging the Ikram fight where they were announcing it, but he hadn't agreed to a contract. The UFC's obviously not going to like that he kind of dug his heels in and didn't take that fight. Also, he had the whole weight miss debacle with Marvin Vettori, which was not great. And so you can put up with that stuff if he's going out there having fun performances as a top contender. If he's going on this long losing streak, you're probably not trying to deal with his antics for much longer. On the other hand, if he picks up a win in his next fight, he has the opportunity to build back, especially if he, shows some flashes or just can return to his old style where he goes out there, puts on fun, violent fights. Then he's right back in the mix in a division that's kind of undergoing a lot of turnover right now, where you have some guys falling off. The Izzies, I think we could see Strickland start to dip. Who knows what's going on with Whitaker? You have a lot of guys rising. There's just a lot of movement in the weight class, which could kind of help him jump back up to the top. So those are guys that I think are entering make or break fights. I guess maybe an honorable mention to Colby Covington. People might throw him in there. I kind of feel like he already had his make or break fight against Joaquin Buckley, so that's why I didn't go in depth on him. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know your thoughts. If you have any other fighters that you thought should have made the video, let me hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.